you so much, Katarina. It's such a pleasure to see you and to see everyone here on the call. Um, you heard a little bit about my background, but it might be helpful for me to tell you, I guess just flesh it out a little bit, how I came to be doing what I'm doing. Um, I had a family history of domestic violence. I was very lucky that my mother had the resources and the wherewithal to be able to leave. So I didn't experience a lot of violence when I was growing up, but definitely in my early years. And when I got to college, one of the first things I started to do was volunteer at the local domestic violence shelter. So my role there was to work on the hotline. I would answer hotline calls, and I got some training for that, but not a lot, but some good training. Hotline calls are generally anonymous. You don't know who is going to be on the other end when you answer a call. But there was one woman who had called through enough times that I got to know her a little bit. Let's call her, checking everybody's names, let's call her Megan. So I had spoken to Megan as she left her abusive husband, as she moved into her own apartment for the first time with their 5-year-old daughter. I spoke with her as she got her own job and as she wended her way through the legal system, getting restraining orders and then fighting for the divorce and custody. And I spoke with her as she was trying to fight against visitation because she didn't want her ex-husband to be having visitation with their daughter, but she lost that because the court reasoned, as they still do today, just because somebody is an abusive husband doesn't mean he's a bad father. So I had been speaking to her kind of over the course of 6 to 9 months as all of these things were happening. And then one day the hotline rang and I picked it up, and what I heard that day was just a scream. It was almost didn't even seem like a human sound. And it went on and on. And what I eventually came to understand was this was Megan. And Megan had just left the pediatrician's office where she found out that her ex-husband had been abusing their daughter during court-ordered visitation. I was the first person she spoke to after she found that out, and I was 19. I, had never been married. I didn't have kids. I was not a lawyer at that time. I wasn't a person, I wasn't a minister. I wasn't a doctor. I really, all I wanted to do, honestly, was just put down the phone and go find somebody else to have this conversation because I had no idea how I could support somebody through something that was so much bigger than anything I had ever encountered. But there wasn't anybody else. There was just me on the hotline. And so what I did was all I could do, and what I have since come to realize is the best thing that somebody needs in that moment. I listened. I just held on to the phone and I just kept saying, "Oh, Megan, I am so sorry. I'm so sorry." And, there were no answers. So it was just listening. And eventually she started to calm down a little bit. She caught her breath and she then said, "Okay." And then she hung up. Now I know because she called back, later over the months to come, I know that she went on to be just an incredible advocate for her little girl. Like she was an amazing, fierce mama warrior out there for her little girl. And I know that that little girl is okay today because of the way that her mother fought for her. And I also know that part of why her mother had the strength and the energy to fight for her was because she had a place that she could go to fall apart when she needed to. And that is something that I've kind of carried with me over, the many, many years, the decades since then, is that, there are horrific things that happen in the world. And they take a toll on us. They are hard. And it is normal to fall apart. in those moments. But if we can fall apart with somebody instead of on our own, it's a little better. And if we can maybe all get a little bit better at supporting each other in those moments where the world comes crashing down, we can all heal a little better and go on and do the important, crucial work that we need to be doing in the world. And so that's what I do now. As you have heard, I've kind of dedicated my life to helping individuals and organizations, teams figure out how to better show up for each other in those hard moments. Did it at DOJ for many years. And what I do now is advise all different kinds of organizations, anything from corporations to schools to nonprofit organizations, all on this idea of what are the things people need when they are struggling, and how do we get better at providing them?
Katharine, I'll be the first to jump in. Thank you so much for that very powerful story and your own journey into this work. Can you share one or two tools or tips that you give to leaders or organizations on how to really practice compassionate listening and really build a culture of empathy in their organizations?
Sure, absolutely. So, one of the things that I did, including through the work I did with you, Katharina, at the Women's Leadership Program, was try to figure out what is it that I would say people should do to support people in trauma. And I really came up with, I came up with 5 steps. Honestly, if you can just get the first 2, I'll be thrilled. We don't necessarily have to go through all 5, but I'll talk you through all 5 quickly. So the first step is listen. And this is active listening, which is more than just being quiet and letting the person talk. Active listening means you are showing them that you want to hear what they have to say. So ask questions, open-ended questions. What happened next? How did you feel then? Let them know you want them to go on. Often when we are opening up about something difficult, we talk a little bit at first, and then we pause to see, does this person really want to hear it? So when we encourage, we nod, we give, oh, please go on. That lets them know, no, really, it is okay for us to go on. So active listening, also watch your body language. It's very common when somebody is sharing something difficult for us to unconsciously adopt a defensive stance. So we lean back, we, cross our arms, sometimes we frown. That's just a very normal thing it's kind of hardwired in us to kind of defend ourselves against stress. And hearing a hard story can be stressful. But unfortunately, it can communicate to the person that we don't want to hear what they're saying. So try to just keep an eye on your body language, try to adopt an open and neutral facial expression. So that's all listening. And then equally important is acknowledge what they've shared. So often we do a really good job of letting them get through the story. And then as soon as they're done, we're like, I know exactly who you need to talk to. Here's what you have to do. And we just want to launch right into problem solving or, ideas or any, sharing our own stories. Before we do any of that, they have to know that we heard them. So just a quick acknowledgement could be something like, thank you for sharing that. We just heard Katharina did it. Thank you for telling us that story. That was beautiful. I'm sorry for everything you're going through. That sounds really hard or scary or whatever it sincerely sounds to you. Just something that acknowledges that you have heard them. You're showing them that you heard them. The responses you want to avoid are ones that either deny or distract from what they've shared. A denial is something like, it's probably not as bad as you think, or I'm sure he didn't mean it that way. A distraction is something like, I went through something similar years ago. Let me tell you how I got through it. Instead, just focus on the person, and acknowledge what they've shared. And honestly, for most interactions, if you can just do those 2, that would be phenomenal and will help them to feel heard, and also show that you continue to be a source of support for them. If you are in a situation where somebody's coming to you for help, a few other steps that might be useful for you to know are one, to share information with them. People who are going through those time periods where it feels like their world is turned upside down often crave information. I saw this with crime victims all the time. Everybody wanted to know what happened, who knew what, when, what was the process going to be going forward. Just share some information. And, and that can be factual, it can be process, it can even be values information. You know, we take these issues very seriously, or I take these issues very seriously. As you are sharing information, try to remember that it can be hard to process information when you are in a period of trauma or distress. So short, clear sentences, repeat yourself a lot will help. The fourth step is empower, which is about referring them to resources if they want them. You know, there are phenomenal resources. I hope you all know about 988, which here in the US is our national mental health crisis line. It's available 24 hours a day. You can call, you can text, free, confidential, trained counseling support. So things like that, know about supports that can be out there for if maybe what they need is a little more than you're qualified to give. And then the final step is R for return. And that's both coming back to the person to check in and also returning to yourself, because it's hard sometimes to hear these stories and support people. So we have to take steps for self-care as well. So those 5 steps are listen, acknowledge, share, empower, and return. And the acronym is LASER. I came up with an acronym in part because I worked in government for so long that I just think in acronyms now. But also because I know that when you're, you know, sometimes we can be really surprised by hearing a story, and it can be hard to remember what it is that we want to do. And an acronym can sometimes help. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions on any of those?
Natasha, go ahead and unmute.
Thank you, Katharine, for your message and for what you are doing for people. And I can relate to things that you mentioned in your story, because I did have an abusive husband. And so I understand from my personal experience how the society lacks compassion and help. And in some cases, unfortunately, help doesn't come in timely manner. So I do have a question. I didn't read your book, but I understand that you explain how to build this environment of compassion at workplace. And do you suggest to build it from the top or the bottom, to start from administration, or from just regular people, employees should have a say or suggestion? And my this is first question. And second question, where do you see God's role in this process of building a compassionate environment? Thank you.
Thank you for your questions, and for sharing your story. I appreciate both of those. So in terms of the culture, how do you build a culture of compassion? It's something that I'm working on all the time. It's so, I think, essential that we learn in all kinds of environments, all groups, that we learn how to better support each other. It builds strong connections between people. It helps individual healing, and ultimately, whatever your organization's goals are, they will be furthered by having the kind of trust that comes from supporting each other through hard times. In terms of how to do it, I do think it has to start with leadership. I think it's very, very challenging to have a real cultural shift if the leadership is not committed to it. So when I work with organizations, I always start with the leaders, and the first phase is always mindset. It's helping them understand why this matters. And sometimes that means getting past their own insecurities. It's possible that they have had experiences in the past where they have not handled issues as well as they wanted to, or have felt uncertain about how to support somebody and may feel insecure about it. And so they think, well, that's not really, I'm a strong leader. I don't have to, somebody else deals with that. And so confronting that and saying, part of a strong leader is understanding where people are hurting and how to better support them to it. Of course, that's your role. So the first phase is always working on mindset with the leadership. Then it's training. And I think that I want everybody to have those skills in that kind of laser technique, the active listening and acknowledgement kinds of efforts. So making sure everybody has common language about it matters when people are struggling. We care about one another and we want to support each other through it. And then the final phase is really implementation, and that's very much organization or team specific. What the thing that will work on one team won't work on another, and it has to be. That's kind of where I see, Natasha, as you said, the bottom up. That's where that comes in, because if the leaders come up with a really phenomenal policy, but without talking to the rest of the organization, it won't be very effective. So it's important that that be a conversation, and that it also change over time. It has to be through iterations. People have to know that if something isn't working, it's okay to say this isn't working and make changes to it. So it's definitely an ongoing effort from there. But I really always see it in those three phases. And then in terms of the role of God and the role of faith in that, I feel like, my faith is Unitarian, and to me, it is very much, it's about the work that we do in the world is very central to my faith. And my prayers are always, well, there's two: let me be a light in the world, and let me be your hands today. So it's, what are the things that I can be doing right now? And often, I must be honest, often I am scared. I don't know that I have it in me to meet this person and their needs right now. And that, I told you one story about back when I was 19, but I had a conversation in the last few months with a friend where she disclosed something, and I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach, and I thought, I have no idea what I should say right now. But that's where the faith comes in, and just letting go and realizing I don't have to know. I'm just here. I'm here to be present. I'm here to be your hands right now in this moment. And I will trust that that'll be enough. And, I also feel like the work that I do feel very much that this is what I was put on earth for, that that's what I'm here to do. So my faith comes into that as well. And it's also what sees me through hard moments. I had a hard moment, gosh, it was maybe 2 months ago in May, where I had a conversation in a training. And I can just share it with you. It was a training that I did for chiefs of police. And I was talking to them about empathetic leadership, and it was really about how do you lead your team. But I had said a few times the phrase compassion fatigue. And one man raised his hand and he said, well, what is compassion fatigue and how do you fight against it? And I said, well, compassion fatigue is when you have not done enough to support yourself through secondary trauma, through supporting others in trauma. What can eventually happen is compassion fatigue. And what that means is your ability to feel is diminished. So you can hear a horrific story and you just can't even muster any sense of caring or any reaction at all. And as I said this, the man behind the guy who had asked the question started to laugh. And he said, I haven't felt anything in years. He said, I watched my son die in front of me on the football field. He said what had happened was he was up in the stands. His son was hit and died, but they eventually worked on him. 6 minutes later, they were able to bring him back to life. But he said, I'm watching this all happen in front of me on the field, and I couldn't muster any feeling at all. I was completely blank. And I thought, oh my gosh. And I said all the things about, well, it took a while to get to that place. It takes a while to get out of it. And, recognizing it as the first step, and here, starting to slowly have little things that you do for yourself every day, just noticing things that you like and don't like, and moving more toward joy and away from fear. And, I said all of the things, but honestly, I came home and I was so shaken because I kept thinking, this is a chief of police. And if he can't muster care for his own son, what kind of care is he offering all of the other sons that he's dealing with every day? And what is that? What are the ripple effects of that in our society? And I just thought, I don't know. and I really felt so hopeless. And I called up a minister friend of mine and I shared it with him, and he was so kind. And he said, there are people like you and me and all of you, like we are the helpers, we are the planters. Our job is to plant seeds. And he said, I know that you planted a seed in that man in that conversation. And you don't know what form it's going to take or when, but I am willing to bet that somewhere deep in him, that seed is starting its process, and it will sprout and it will turn into something over time. He said, we just have to keep planting seeds. And that's what I try to hold on to when I get overwhelmed and exhausted and start to lose my hope. Is that sense of, we're all of us here on this call, we're all planting those seeds, and hopefully over time we are building a better world through it. So thank you, Natasha, for those questions.
Thank you for your great response. Thank you, Katharine.
Oh, can I just if I can make a quick comment on that story that you just told? I think a lot of people out there may not feel empathy, but they know at the same time to act empathetically. And so that was all I really wanted to say. I think that's common.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. Empathy is one of those, it's a little bit hard to define. Like, what does that even mean? And I think of empathy as understanding the feelings of the person with whom you're interacting or the person that you see. I think of it as sort of a superpower. And in the way of superpowers, like, you have to learn to control it. And it's something that I have had to learn over time, that I get to decide when to deploy my empathy or not. If I walk into a room and I can see, like, oh, something's going on with Tim. He seems pretty mad right now. Do I have to go and sit next to him and find out what's going on? I can choose to. And if I have the energy and I feel like, yeah, that's what I want to do, I will. But it's also recognizing that it's a choice. And there are times where I'm kind of depleted myself, and it maybe wouldn't be the best thing for me. And I always have to remember to be protecting my own energy as well. Yeah, I think that's such a great point, Steve. Thank you.
Katharine, I loved your presentation, and I so admire what you're doing. And I was particularly touched by the prayers that you pray. I think those were just fantastic prayers. Make me the hands, let me be a light. I mean, that's all we really can do. I liked your image of just planting seeds. And I just love your work around trauma. Trauma has been a big theme in our speaker series. And so it's just great to have someone who's an expert in it. My question is a little bit like kind of bouncing a little bit off Natasha's in a sense, and you've kind of hinted at it, but I was wondering if you go a step further. how do you set boundaries? Because now you're a known person for trauma. Like all your friends know that, your colleagues know that, your clients know that, people who don't pay you know that. And they want free advice. How do you know like how to put a protection of yourself, like so you don't get depleted? Do you have any strategies around that, or how do you do self-care?
Yeah, it's a great question, and something I've certainly developed over time. When I was in law school, I thought what I wanted to do was go and work full time with survivors of domestic violence, getting restraining orders, and I realized very quickly I had such terrible boundaries. I would within a year have a house full of women and children, and I thought I can't do that. I have to work on those boundaries. So now I'm much better at it. A few things have helped. So one is, I'm very much a helper. I see somebody in pain, I want to help them. One of the things that I have come to understand is that we are never going to be able to solve anybody else's problem. I sometimes think of it as this is their path to walk, and I can't walk it for them. And when somebody comes to me who is struggling, if I get too invested in them getting better, domestic violence is a great example of this. So a woman comes to me and she's in a violent situation. My impulse is, well, we have to get you out of that right now. Right. And so just get in my car. We're going to, we're going to go get you out of that. Now, a couple things happen if I take that action. One is I am never going to have a better solution for her than she has for herself. So me saying, oh, there's this shelter, I can put you in it tonight. Maybe what I'm not taking into consideration is that her mother lives with her, and her mother has some specialist that she needs to see for a medical condition who is near her home. And if she can't get her to that appointment, she will never, she has to fulfill that responsibility. So my solution is not going to work because I don't fully understand her life and everything that she's dealing with. Her solution will always be better than mine. Another thing is that I am it feels really good to solve somebody else's problem. Makes you feel like a hero, right? Me taking that over is pulling that away from her. So it's like I'm the hero, I'm the one wearing the cape, when really I want her to be the one wearing the cape. Her solution is always going to be better, and her taking those steps are going to be empowering for her. So that's another piece of it. And then the final on just boundary setting with another person is understanding that totally lost track of it now. I don't want to create a barrier between me and her. If I say to her, well, you really need to go to this shelter tonight, and she doesn't go to the shelter, she is then going to feel afraid to come back to me for support later on, because she didn't follow my advice. And therefore, I am taking away myself as another source of support for her. So all of those things have helped me to be better about setting boundaries with individuals. I have a friend who, the way she phrased it was, you provide the resource, you let go of the outcome. So you tell them there is a shelter out there if you want it, and then you don't get too invested in whether she goes to that shelter or not. And that has helped me a lot, frankly, in boundary setting. It's just recognizing my power it's important, the stuff that I do, but honestly, it's pretty limited. Like I can provide listening support for you right now. And then, you are going to do what you're going to do, and that's up to you. This is your path to walk. So that has helped me a lot. Now, in terms of protecting my energy with individuals, a few things that have helped me are, one, learning how to stop the conversation gracefully when I can tell that I'm getting depleted. So often, frankly, if you are not trying to solve it, you can go a little longer. If you're just saying, "Mhm," and gosh, that sounds awful, and I'm so sorry, it doesn't actually take all that much out of you, and you can do that for a while. But if it is something that, because of my own background and experience, or because of the way I'm feeling that day, or because of the person's, maybe they're in a very volatile state, and it is really depleting me. I have learned to be pretty forgiving with myself and clear with the other person. And so what I do is I just say, like, Megan, I am so glad that you are, coming to me and sharing this. I've got to admit, I am like reeling from what you just said. This is really hard. I just need a minute. So I'm going to go get a drink of water, come back in a little bit. Or, can we talk about this tomorrow? I've got to admit, like, maybe it's just because I've had a hard day anyway, just really struggling to give you the kind of support that you need right now. Um, Allowing myself that, and just, it's not a shameful thing. It's not bad that Megan came to me when she needed help and I just didn't have it. Kind of taking away any of the guilt or shame around it and just being open about my boundaries has really helped as well.
Great advice. Thank you. Those are great tips.
Yeah, sure. I imagine you're often in that position as well.